Welcome to Bombast. Today's geopolitical landscape is defined by what some analysts are calling a crisis with historic stakes, an escalating standoff between the United States and Iran that threatens to tip from diplomatic tension into open conflict. Recent reporting shows that the US is considering unprecedented pressure tactics, from a token nuclear agreement that would permit limited Iranian enrichment if it leaves no path to a weapon, to military options that include targeting Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, and key leadership figures. At the same time, diplomatic engagement is still underway. Tehran is preparing to deliver a written nuclear counterproposal after talks in Geneva, while Washington has set a 10 to 15-day deadline for a deal or faces the threat of military action. Meanwhile, inside Iran, a societal pressure is mounting. As university campuses reopened, students across Tehran and other cities have taken to the streets, chanting against the regime and voicing support for political alternatives amidst the deadliest wave of unrest since 1979. Finally, the interests of Arab Persian Gulf states are now deeply entangled. These nations express deep concern that a US military confrontation with Iran would have serious regional consequences, from economic disruptions to security dilemmas. With us today to unpack all of this is Erfan Nourbakhsh, an expert on Middle East geopolitics, US foreign policy, and Iranian domestic politics. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you again for having me.
Mr. Nourbakhsh, the Axios report cites options on the table that include everything from token nuclear deals to targeted strikes against Iran's leadership. What does such a range of possibilities tell us about the current US policy mindset towards Tehran?
I still believe that they've already been decided inside Washington circles and also Tel Aviv that there will be no more deal with Iranian regime, especially with Ali Khamenei. So the all hardware that coming from the US and has been already made a pincer by two aircraft carrier, first of all, Abraham Lincoln in Sea of Oman, and then Gerald S. Ford in Mediterranean, it's looked like they're going to be, unfortunately, that kind of operation that we saw in 1991 against Saddam Hussein in removing his forces from Kuwait. So this time is also we are going through a effect-based operation or doctrine. The target that US has it for himself is removing the current Iranian regime, but probably not completely, on the way that it can change its behavior completely. It could be removing just by one, if that happens by one person, head of IRGCs, for example, and supreme leader, it will be better even for US. The less casualty from both sides, the better result for Trump. And also, we should not neglect about some of the news that we had this week that they may also affect what is going to happen. First of all, of course, that as you mentioned, there's 10 to 15 days deadline that Trump input for Iran. And don't forget also right now we have a battle between Trump and US Supreme Court about the global tariff. That again, we had another counter-strike from Trump after that he used again his own by creating such a what we can say the expert says a legal gray zone. The Trump reaction was immediately signed a new 10% global tariff under the section of 122 because in 1974 we had this trade act. So for 150 days, the temporary this new tariffs will remain. So that means that Trump also don't have so much time. The season also that he can strike, the period that he can strike is something between, don't forget that is also started Ramadan in Islamic countries, and it's not so much important for Iran anymore, but for Islamic countries, it is very important, especially in Sunnis countries. So also Trump doesn't want to probably U.S. administration consider this as an effect. So maybe if we say that, for example, the Ramadan will ends in 25 to 27 days from now on, and also in before we saw that when Trump put a deadline, usually he doesn't act exactly at the end of the deadline. We had several such deadlines for Ukraine, nothing happened, and also when the 2 months deadline was for Iran last time, it didn't. Trump didn't start exactly at the end of the deadline, but several days later. So we can perhaps see such an operation that between 15 to 30 days from now, something will happen. Either if it was also we should put it in concept that whole the area was a big deception operation and it could happen even tomorrow.
What are the realistic chances that Washington would actually authorize an operation targeting Iran's supreme leader or senior officials? What would be the political and legal implications of such a choice?
Yeah, US got that because of the bloody January that we had. So from their point of view, also supreme leader has lost his legitimacy between the people. So there won't be any resistance after removing her, and on the contrary, it will bring more support actually from Iranian public. That's what they calculated. That's what they hope. Also, we remember that when 12 days war, Israel attack. Also, they also hoped on such a reaction. For example, we are going to hit IRGC. This is a great chance for you to come out and what we are not going to send soldiers, of course, on the battlefield, but you will be our soldier. So this is something that also U.S. right now think about it. Also, they hope on such a things that somehow put the Venezuelan base model in Middle East. So first of all, we have a public that has been isolated, that is cracked down badly, but it still is resistance. From one time, we have a regime that is in weakest time period right now in 47 years based on most of the expert calculation. So it hoping that by removing Khamenei, that also the Arab countries or Islamic countries won't react so much, and the public will also rejoice and celebrate it. And some part of the moderate, let's say, circles inside IRGC also, if they have been given the signal, for example, that we are not going to do anything much further, like just like Venezuela, we are put you we are let you to remain in power. So they are hoping on such things, so it won't drag. If it drags, then unfortunately, the next phase of the war will be more deadlier and with more casualties, especially for Iranian publics.
How significant is the timeline, the 10 to 15-day deadline Trump reportedly set, in terms of shifting negotiations or militarizing the crisis?
No, when we talk about timeline, we should consider several factors. First of all, this is the weather. So in the region in Middle East, the best time probably for that kind of war is unfortunately it's a time that the Iranian New Year. So it's a beginning of the spring. So this is the first thing. Second, as I mentioned, that Ramadan that has started. So maybe still in US they considered it as a factor. Of course, for Israel, it's not a factor at all. We remember after the 7th of October, Israeli campaign in Gaza, he didn't care anything about the Ramadan, and he continued bombing Gaza. But probably for US it still is a factor. Also, the forces that had to be put in a place, and also by denying of the countries like Qatar and Saudi Arabia of the logistic supply and logistic basis. So they needed to put on the table the second strategy that based on mostly airborne and mostly based on the aircraft carrier. And with one aircraft group, they couldn't done it, so they needed to bring down the second one. And actually, they wanted to do it, but they never talked about it, so because they wanted to put the Also Iranian military in shock somehow. So Trump also playing this part based exactly on the timetable that the military has. That in that timetable we shouldn't give so much room for maneuver. Also putting pressure on the table of negotiation. This is also very important. And so they supposed to meet Iranian and U.S. delegation supposed to meet in 2 weeks in Geneva. So probably that in that 2 weeks in Geneva, that will be the final point. This is the time that Iran should say either we are going to accept or no accept. So something like that will happen. It's also very so much. Remind me as what happened in 1991, 1991 period with negotiation in Geneva between Iraqi delegation and UN delegation. So the UN US delegation, and they couldn't reach any agreement. And Iraqi side, they insisted of remaining in Kuwait, continue occupying. So after that, and when the Desert Shield operation that was the bringing all the forces in the region, when it completed, now it was time for the Desert Storm, and Desert Storm started that somehow also in a time that was from weather point of view, from war and region's environment was suitable for that kind of operation. So right now we have this window.
Some analysts argue that even limited strikes could escalate unpredictably. From a strategic standpoint, does the US have a credible exit strategy, or is de escalation increasingly unlikely?
I don't believe that they are going to de-escalate after bringing so much hardware, so much expensive hardware. You know that in war, the biggest enemy for a threat for the military commander is not coming from the enemy; it's coming from the logistics. So supplying and logistic line are something that threats actually the whole operation. So by this kind of mobilization, I don't think actually US is looking for a de-escalation. Either Iran completely accept and give up all the thing that it has. It means no enrichment of uranium, limiting down the missiles. But we should also put ourselves in Iranian shoes. What kind of guarantee they have that even if they reach such an agreement, what if the Israel now uses the opportunity and attack? So they say that look, we had this kind of situation 7 months ago, and that happened. We're going to reach an agreement, and Israel attack. You're asking us to just give up our arms and hoping on your best intentions, on your good intentions. None of this is going to happen. This is the real politic time based on the what Trump created. Unfortunately, we don't have any UN. We don't have anything we can rely on. We can only rely on our arms. That's Iranian point of view, and I believe that this is the right point of view. So, and US probably knows that, but still, Trump dreams of such a things. For example, that as Marco Rubio stated that if Khamenei wants to meet Trump, of course he will do it, and this will be the huge moment for Trump. We can show that look, well, I did something that in 47 none of the U.S. president couldn't do. He wants to make history. He wants to put his name in history of someone that in spite of all the things that they were talking about him, telling about him, he was the best of the best. You know that 2 weeks ago I was watching, probably you watched that, the hearing of the Pamela Bandy in U.S. Congress, and she was calling Trump is the best president of the history, and that kind of language, that kind of flattery, that kind of, I can say, fascism that right now is ruling in DC. So we should also put that in our calculation. So if today, for example, Iranian officials decided to give Trump such an opportunity that they are not going to do that, probably something will happen. But still, we shouldn't forget that whole this Iranian nuclear issue, let's say, Iranian nuclear problem, let's say, it started because Israel felt threat, not the US. So Israel is the key also player here. If Israel doesn't get satisfaction, nothing will happen.
How do the Persian Gulf Arab states view the current trajectory? Are they pushing for restraint, alliances, or hedging bets in a potential conflict?
In 47 years of Islamic Republic time, there was always uneasy and relation and tension actually with these countries because we have a monarchy was removed by an ideological regime that wanted to export the revolution to the Muslim world, actually not to the Western countries but to the Muslim world where Muslim people live, and that was a direct danger for these countries. They couldn't defeat Iran alone, but they could also rely on the US or Western countries. So they always try to show that we are not the danger, we are not the people who are going to start the hostility, but on back doors, they always encourage US and Western countries that Iran is the problem. Please save us from this threat. So right now, something like this also happening. In the public, of course, they are against all the idea. They say that we are not going to let US to use our bases or airspace for any attacks against Iran because they are all afraid of the Iran retaliation. Even one missile is deadly for them. But I'm sure they already part of this plan. Even when Israel attacked Iran, later it was came out that Saudi Arabia already has that kind of intelligence sharing relation with Israel and even coordinate help Israel coordinate these attacks on Iran. So this is what is happening right now. Publicly, they are against what is going to happen. But internally, of course, they want to get rid of the Iranian problem, and they also think that if the regime falls, there won't be as prosperous Iran or something like that that made a threat to them, but it will be Iran who is going to something like a civil war or unrest. So it also gives them more time and more leverage to play. For example, Iran doesn't have any border with Saudi Arabia. I mean, the land border. So they don't consider it as a threat of if tomorrow the regime falls and somehow unrest starts. So they think that probably that's also a good time for us to put more pressure or spread more influence and removing a country that could be an potential great oil exporter as it was before also is beneficial for them economically.
Now let's move on to the domestic dynamics in Iran. On the day students return to classes, protests have broken out at multiple universities. How significant are these campus demonstrations in the broader context of the 2025-2026 unrest? And what do these protests tell us about the internal legitimacy and support for the current political system in Iran? How might these dynamics constrain or embolden Iranian leadership decisions on foreign policy?
I don't think it actually has much influence of the way of the thinking. We should remember how, and we should try to simulate how they think. They think that they are in the right position. They think that any unrest should be cracked down. So, these people coming after these are the people who passed the Islamic Revolution, and they learned this lesson that during the Islamic Revolution, the more Shah was giving opportunities to the revolutionaries, the more revolutionaries gained power. So all these years, they learned this lesson, as they called it lesson, and they never tried to situation get out of hand. Maybe 2 3 days, as we saw, something will happen, and then in one day they decide to crack down badly. After what happened in Bloody January, they don't care really about 2 or 3 even dead students or 10 or 15 more arrests in universities. These were symbolic, of course, for Iranian public. That means that they are still defiant. But right now, they think otherwise. I mean, the regime has bigger problems to take care of. That's the U.S. presence and U.S. threat. So for them, this is something that would happen anyway, because you know that based on the Islamic tradition, 40 days after the death, and because that was for the people inside Iran, these are martyrs, and so 40 days after their death, so of course there will be such a reaction, but it doesn't bother regime, I can say.
US media figures, including President Trump's, have referenced figures like 32,000 killed in protest crackdown. To what extent are these narratives internalized inside Iran or used politically abroad? How might they affect policy decisions in Washington and Tehran?
This is the first time actually the Trump actually names of the people has been killed. We all remember how it started. First of all, he denied any killing by the regime. He said that there were people who just get under the protesters, and that was something that may happen all the time. There was, and then second time when we talked about it, he said that I actually stopped the regime from hanging people, which is completely untrue. And this is the first time he actually mentioned a figure and actually talk about people who were dead, because he started from the help coming, be brave, we are lock and loaded, and then next week he started negotiations with the Iranian regime about uranium enrichment and the missile program. That means that I just needed you to weaken and bring down the legitimacy of the other side for me to have a better terms on the negotiation table for myself. So he also reminds regime right now that look, you don't have any legitimacy. We haven't forgotten about the bloody January, even if we haven't mentioned that. And also this is a signal, because I'm sure that there were many people inside the Trump administration who was telling him about that you ignore Iranian who hope that you intervene. And if that continues like that, there will be nothing for you at the end. So regime could, for example, can get a deal or something for some time, but still you will be left without any allies inside. That means Iranian public. So he uses these cards and uses his pressure also both on Iranian regime. He signals that he still consider most military operation. Second, it gives a signal to the Iranian public that look, I haven't forgotten you, and this is not about Iranian enrichment or security. Despite what the GD Vance said clearly that this is not our job to fix the Iranian problems. We are just concerned about the nuclear weapons. Now he says something else that look, we haven't forgotten you, so be brave, still waiting for us. So when I start, for example, to our airborne operation, you will be in the streets and will act as my soldiers.
What about the economic consequences? Global oil markets, shipping routes like the Strait of Hormuz. How serious are these threats? You may also reference broader reporting beyond the four priority articles that I mentioned in my intro.
It was always a threat that by mining and blocking the Hormuz Strait, the global market will jump and the price of oil will jump. But also, we shouldn't forget that this is mostly a danger for Europe and China. And Russia also will benefit from it. And this is something that's going to help actually Russia to get a better term also with the US. Said, look, we are the country that can rely on us. We are not doing anything in the our oil doesn't pass the Straits of Hormuz. So whenever you need us, we can, instead of confiscating our shadow fleet, we can actually bring the oil in the global market. So if that happened, if such a scenario happened, let's say that Iran will block the Hormuz. First of all, U.S. have some countermeasures, for example, sweeping for some days. It will take some days, but they will sweep and remove the mines anyway, and they clear the straits. And second, Russia can come inside and say that I'm a stabilizer of the world economy. Look, I'm a good player, and just for example, be better with me in the terms something that also Trump wanted to do. From the first day he came to the power back in 2017, he always wanted to have Russia by himself against China. This is not a secret that he admires people like Vladimir Putin. He also admires people with power, and he knows that Russia doesn't have such a conventional force to counter US, but it has more nuclear and it has the biggest arsenal of nuclear warhead in the world. So this is something that Trump, of course, admire and respects. So probably in that scenario, we will have such act and such a reaction actually from Russia.
Thank you very much, Mr. Erfan Nourbakhsh, for your frank and nuanced input into this very, very complicated crisis. As we've explored today, the US-Iran crisis in 2026 is not just another flashpoint. It is a potential inflection point in international relations. On one axis sits the possibility of diplomacy and compromise, a narrowly tailored agreement on nuclear enrichment that keeps channels of engagement open. On the other, deeply destabilizing military escalation that could redraw the map of the Middle East, confront global energy markets with shockwaves, and unleash waves of geopolitical insecurity. Inside Iran, society itself is in a flux. Students and young citizens, perhaps the most dynamic segments of the Iranian society, are demanding change at home, even as their leaders confront external threats. Abroad, even traditional US allies in the Persian Gulf are uneasy, torn between alliance commitments and palpable fear of being swept into a conflict they neither want nor control. In Washington, Tehran, and Riyadh, and across the region, decisions being made today will echo for years in regional stability, global norms around nuclear proliferation, and lives of millions. In moments like this, the world must ask not just what options exist, but which options avoid catastrophe. Thank you for your insight, Mr. Irfan, and thank you to our viewers for joining us in this critical conversation. Goodbye.